My brother Cherry, go.
Go ahead, please. Yeah, please, go ahead. No, not the table. I thought you were going to take care of the reverb. Yeah, I walk around a bunch. Inshallah, can you guys all move back? You know, spread out, get comfortable, but move back. I like to walk a lot, up and down. I move around. I like to stay awake, I suppose. I've said this talk that I'm about to give you for the last 5 years, nearly every weekend. So I may actually fall asleep while I'm walking. And if that happens, please, sisters, can you guys hear all right? You don't have to run and hide. I'm not going to keep looking. I just want to know if you can hear all right. Alhamdulillah. Good. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for having us in here this evening. That camera is going to have so little footage of me on it, it's going to be fun. Because I walk around a bunch. It's just part of what I do. I need to stay up, I need to stay energized, I need to stay motivated. What I'm going to be talking about is not fun. What I'm going to be talking about is actually quite depressing and has been a great deal of emotional stress and misery for me for many years. So I have to move, I have to keep my energy up, I have to keep my spirits up. Otherwise this talk just, it wears me down. It's emotionally draining. Without further ado, I was born in Phoenix, Arizona in 1983. With the exception of the years that I was in the military, I've always lived in Phoenix, Arizona. I still live in Phoenix, Arizona. For the brother who asked about the administrative costs with regards to the $250, the 16% that doesn't go to funding attorneys goes to paying for me to get from point A to point B to give a lecture like I'm giving right now. We have to pay for airplane tickets, we have to pay for a hotel, etc. So our overhead of 16%, that's like ridiculously low. I think CARE is operating at around a 33% overhead. Same thing for other organizations of that type. To operate at 16%, it's amazing, mashallah. That's a lot of personal sacrifice from all of us as employees and charitable individuals for the organization. So, as I said, I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. I've lived there all of my life. I grew up in a bit of a stressful kind of a home. My mother and father weren't necessarily prepared to be parents. My mother had me at the age of 17, my father was 18. They both believed that if they had children, just like Disney teaches them, if they had children, they would live happily ever after. Get married, have kids, everything falls into place. The job comes, the house comes, all the bills somehow get paid for, they just smile and live happily ever after. That's not how life works. Any of the parents in the room know that that's not how life works. But this is what my parents believed when they were young. As they were raising me and still growing and becoming adults, they had their own issues to go through. They had alcoholism issues, they had drug addiction issues, they had infidelity issues. As a result of such, when I was 7, they decided to separate. They decided to divorce, and they sent me to live with my grandparents. This was a blessing for me. I didn't know at the time, but this was much better for me in the long run. My parents were not ready to be parents. They had no place having children at such a young age. Now, my grandparents was a distinctly different scenario altogether. They had already had children. They had already made their mistakes, lived their lives. They knew who they were established, they had roots. My grandfather was from England. He was a strong Catholic. My grandmother was from Virginia. She was a Protestant. Being that neither one of them agreed which version of Christianity is the right version of Christianity, they didn't tell me to be a Catholic. They didn't tell me to be a Protestant. Because to tell me to be one would be putting down the other. To tell me to be a Catholic would put down my grandmother because she was a Protestant. To tell me to be a Protestant would put down my grandfather because he was a Catholic. So instead, they told me to go out, to learn, to value my education, and to treat people the way that I would want to be treated. In a home that doesn't have religion, I think that's probably the best advice that you can give to a child. Treat people the way that you want to be treated, and learn. I took that a bit too seriously, particularly when it came to my education. I think we were in 7th grade, maybe 8th grade, and we were studying about World War II. We were having a review for an exam we were about to have on World War II, and the teacher asked the class who was responsible for killing the most number of people in World War II. Simple question. This girl raises her hand, and she says, Adolf Hitler? And the teacher says, that's correct. I said, no, it's not. I raise my hand, and I go, no, That's not Hitler. It's Joseph Stalin. And teacher says, what do you mean? And I say, Joseph Stalin killed 22 million people. Adolf Hitler killed 16 million men. This isn't complicated math. Joseph Stalin was the answer. She said, Terry, will you please turn to page 164 and read what it says in the bottom paragraph? I turn to page 164 in our textbook, and I start reading. And as I'm reading aloud to the class, sure enough, I read, Adolf Hitler killed the most number of people in World War II. Despite knowing that it was Joseph Stalin, our textbook said Adolf Hitler. When we took the test, I got the answer wrong. Because I put Joseph Stalin. I knew that it was Joseph Stalin. I'm fortunate that at an early age, I learned that what I was learning in the American educational system, what our textbooks were teaching me, was not in fact history. It was not in fact the truth. It was the American version of history. It was the American version of the truth. And when I figured that out, I started spending a great deal of time at the city library reading about what we were learning about in school, so that I would get a worthwhile education. As a result of this, I ended up finishing high school a year and a half early. I went to a trade school afterwards and received a degree in audio engineering. And about the time that I turned 18, I was essentially going down the same road that my father was going down when he was 18. I was staying out all night, I was drinking and driving, I was playing pool, I had a girlfriend who I had been with for a number of years. You know, we weren't going to get married or anything like that, but we were doing what boyfriends and girlfriends in America do. I wasn't proud of who I was. I had a brain, I had educational accomplishments, but I lacked structure and order. I lacked discipline. I hadn't really become a man yet. I turned 18, but I wasn't a man. Just because you're 18, just because you can vote, it doesn't make you a man. I wanted to become something more. I wanted to grow. I needed that push, that next step. And as I was sitting at home channel surfing one night, I saw a commercial and it said, "Be all that you can be." That's what I was looking for. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be all I could be. That was the answer. Whoever thought of that slogan, "Be all that you can be," I hope that individual got a big pay raise, because I guarantee you thousands of Americans enlisted in the Army because of that slogan. Be all that you can be. It's simple, it rhymes, it's easy to remember. They even had a catchy little song for it. I woke up the next morning, I was sitting there in the shower, I'm washing in my arms and whatnot, singing that song. Be all that you can be. That's a great idea. I'm going to go into the Army. The Army will make a man out of me. The Army will give me structure and discipline. The Army will give me order. This is what I've been looking for. It'll look good on a resume. It'll always look good. I'll always have a job available if I go to the Army. This is a sound decision. This is a smart decision. This is what I should do. In 2002, all the cool kids were joining the Army. They weren't wearing tight pants and having iPhones like cool kids today. They were joining the Army. 9/11 had happened. Our country was strong in patriotism. False patriotism, but our country was strong in patriotism. So everybody who couldn't go to college was going to the service. I went to the recruiter. I walked in, I sat down. I said, "I want to join the Army." The recruiter looks at me and he kind of smiles and he says, "That's okay. We don't need you. Have a good day. Take care." Kind of pushes me out the door. I walk outside of the door and I light up a cigarette and I start thinking to myself, why did this guy say nothing? You know, I'm healthy, I'm able-bodied, I have all of my limbs, I can see and I can speak, I can think clearly. I graduated high school, I have a degree. Why did he say no? Is there something about me? Am I not good enough? And then that night when I got home and I looked in the mirror, I realized that perhaps having all of these piercings and being covered in tattoos and having blue hair wasn't what the Army was looking for. The Army recruiter looked at me and he saw rubber. He saw trouble. And he was thinking to himself, why am I going to take this guy? Why am I going to take this risk? If I just wait a few more days, somebody from the basketball team, somebody from the football team, somebody from the baseball team will come. I'll take one of them. I'll take the natural athlete. The athlete makes a better soldier. The athlete makes a better killer. But this one, he's a risk. I don't want him. No, forget about this. Well, about a week went by. I came back to the recruiters. I had shaved my head. I went out and bought a long sleeve shirt, took out some of my piercings, and sat back down and said, "Hey, I want to join the Army." He says, that's okay. Didn't I tell you last week we don't need you? All right. Went home. I thought about it some more. 9/11 had happened. We were going to war with Iraq for some reason. We've had 13 years to figure that out now, and we still don't know what the connection is between 9/11 and Iraq. But we were going to war with Iraq, so we needed soldiers. I didn't understand why this recruiter was saying no. Third week, I go to the recruiter. Hey, you know what? I want to join the army. I'm here. Why do you want to join the army? I grew up watching G.I. Joe, man. I want to kill people and get paid for it. Why does anybody want to join the army? That's okay. We still don't need you. Stop coming here. Go away. Well, my options weren't looking that good. I had Taco Bell on one hand, I had unemployment on the other hand. I didn't want to do either one of those. That didn't sound like fun. I didn't want to live in a box. I didn't want to make burrito supremes for the rest of my life. Fourth time, I go to the recruiter. He knows the deal. He knows what I'm going to say as soon as I walk in. He says, look, here's what we're going to do. You need to go downtown. You need to take your ASVAB. We'll see what you score on your ASVAB, and then afterwards we'll talk. His theory was that I was dumb, that I would score poorly on the ASVAB. And he could tell me, you're just too stupid. You can't cover the military. Maybe go try the Marines, but you're not Army material. Leave us alone. Well, I went downtown. I took the ASVAB. For those of you who don't know, the ASVAB is a standardized government test that allows for the government to figure out how they can best exploit you. If you're as intelligent as a sack of rocks, they'll make you a mechanic. If you've got a bit of a brain on your shoulders, maybe they'll make you a linguist or an interrogator. If you've got a good brain upstairs, they'll make you a doctor or a lawyer or a physicist. There's plenty of jobs within the military, 212 to be exact. I don't know what I scored, but I know in the time that it took me to get home from downtown after taking that test, I had 2 missed voicemails from my recruiter. He wanted to meet me the next morning. He wanted to have breakfast. We went out to breakfast the next day and somehow managed to spend $60 having breakfast. We went out to one of the best resorts in Phoenix, Arizona, which, if you don't happen to know, Phoenix has plenty of resorts. We have more golf courses than any other state, yada, yada, yada. We have lots of resorts. Many of them are expensive. I don't know how we spent $60 having breakfast, but we did. Any basketball fans in the room? Back in 2002, you may recall, we had Steve Nash in the Suns. He was doing well. Kobe hadn't really gotten into trouble yet, so he was kind of doing well. Who's playing in the Lakers? Or excuse me, who's playing in the playoffs? The Suns and the Lakers. Who calls me up and has courtside tickets to watch the game? My recruiter. Takes me out, lets me see the game, yada, yada, yada. We go and sit down in the office, and he says to me, you can join. We want you in the Army. We'll give you anything you want. What do you want to do? What job do you want? What can we do to get you in the Army? The tables had turned all of a sudden. He became my best friend. He wanted me now. Now he was interested. And that's when I made the mistake of asking him what job is giving a bonus. When you say what job is giving a bonus to a recruiter, that's about the sweetest words they can hear. If some crazy-looking white kid like myself came walking under the Masjid right now and said he wanted to become a Muslim, I mean, would that not be the best thing that we could hear? How many of us would just get up and run to him and tell him, oh, you just say your Shahada, you just say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, you be a Muslim, just say this. We'd be excited about it. When you say what job is giving a bonus, that's what they hear. They smile from ear to ear. They're happy. For a $2,000 bonus, I became a military police officer in the United States Army. I had no interest in being a police officer. I didn't want to be a cop. I don't like cops. I'm afraid of cops. I'm afraid of anybody with a badge. I'm afraid of anybody with a uniform. I always have been. Particularly now that I've lived through it and I've seen what happens when you give small people a little bit of power. Evil, horrible things is what happens. I enlisted in the Army in August of 2002. I was stationed in Fort Leonard, Missouri in December of 2002. I was married in March of 2003, and I found out in May of 2003 that I was going to Guantanamo. I didn't think to myself to go home and Google Guantanamo. If I did, I probably would have spelled it wrong. 98% of Americans put an I in Guantanamo. There's no I in it. It's a Spanish word. But they put an I in Guantanamo nonetheless. I don't think that I'm smarter than 98% of the US, so I'm sure I would have spelled it wrong as well. I thought to myself that I had just got married and I wanted to spend as much time as I could with my wife because I wanted to make sure that I had a strong marriage. I wanted to make sure that when I came home, my wife would still be there. We went off to do our 2 weeks of training to work in Guantanamo. 2 weeks. That's all it takes for the government to train anybody in this room to work in a prison, unlike any prison anywhere else in the world. 2 weeks. We conducted this prison training in Fort Dix, New Jersey. I mention the location because Fort Dix, New Jersey doesn't have a prison facility. So we made a prison facility with PVC pipes and plastic wire. It's a little bit of a stretch of the imagination. We had to pretend when we went to work in the morning that we were in a prison. We didn't have the manual from Guantanamo because the manual from Guantanamo wasn't allowed to leave the island. If the manual from Guantanamo left the island and fell into the wrong hands, it would prove that Guantanamo existed. And in 2003, Guantanamo didn't exist as far as the news and the media was concerned. So we used the manual for Fort Knox. Fort Knox is where the U.S. has money. Not people, not Muslims, money. The individuals who were training us had never been to Guantanamo. They didn't know anything about Guantanamo. They didn't know anything about Islam. They didn't know anything about Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the Mujahideen. They didn't know anything about any of this. They worked in normal prisons in the U.S. And the cherry on the cake, as far as I'm concerned, has anybody in this room ever seen Jersey Shore on TV? You know, surprisingly, nobody ever raises their hand when I ask that question. I know there's people who've seen Jersey Shore, but they just don't want to admit it. SubhanAllah. We're training in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and we have no criminals to train with. I've seen Jersey Shore. I know there is plenty of criminals in New Jersey. There's tons of them. But we have none. So for half the day, I would be the criminal, and half the day, I would be the police officer. For all intent and purpose, this was the worst training that anyone could possibly receive for working in Guantanamo. However, when it came to cultural awareness, when it came to learning about Islam, the Army did a much better job. For those of you who are not familiar with the military structure, 3 soldiers makes a team. 3 to 4 teams makes a squad. 4 squads creates a platoon. 3 to 4 platoons creates a company. Each one of these steps has a leader, meaning there's a team leader, a squad leader, a platoon leader, and a company leader, also known as the first sergeant. Whenever there would be a gathering of soldiers, somebody from the leadership would be directing the soldiers and telling them, remember, when we get to Guantanamo, do not be complacent. When we get to Guantanamo, do not be relaxed, do not be calm. Do not talk to the detainees. The detainees are the worst of the worst. They're Al-Qaeda, they're the Taliban, and they hate you. They hate everything that you stand for. They hate you because you're white, they hate you because you're American, they hate you because you have freedom. I want you to remember what happened on 9/11. Remember what we were fighting for. Every time, 3 soldiers, 12 soldiers, squad, platoon, company, we would hear this. Every day we had an accountability formation to make sure that everybody was present, hence the name, accountability formation. At that point in time, our first sergeant would come and address us. He would tell us a similar speech. When we get to Guantanamo, men, do not be complacent. Do not talk to these men. They're not men, they're lower than men. They're terrorists, they're animals. They hate you, they hate America, they hate freedom, they hate Jesus. They hate everything that this country stands for and makes this country good. When we get down there, I don't want you to have any compassion on these sand diggers. I don't want you to have any compassion on these dirt farmers. They're nothing but camel jockeys. They're Taliban. They're dirt farmers. Do not treat them as humans because they are not humans. They hate you. Army taught me everything that I needed to know about Islam to work in Guantanamo. We finished our 2 weeks of training way up in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and we got on our plane to fly down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, south of Florida. We landed 45 minutes later. And I thought to myself, there's no possible way we made it from New Jersey to Cuba in 45 minutes. That's just not possible. We deboarded the plane. I'm thinking maybe somebody didn't fill it up, or maybe there's something wrong with the plane. We're looking around, and there's all these tall buildings, and it's smoggy and dirty, and I'm pretty sure I saw some rats pulling a baby away to the side of the street. I realized we were in New York City. Our commander had arranged for us to go to Ground Zero that day. He wanted Ground Zero to be the last piece of U.S. soil that we saw. He wanted us to walk around and see the flowers and photographs, to see the candles, to see the comments that were written on the walls. He wanted us to see the destruction. He wanted us to see the rubble that was still there. And as we were getting onto that plane, he told us, I know you've heard it many times before, men, do not be complacent. When we get to Guantanamo, I want you to remember what happened here. When we get to Guantanamo, I want you to remember this place. I want you to remember what you've seen today. When we get to Guantanamo, I want you to remember the 3,000 innocent Americans that we lost. I want you to remember the 3,000 men, women, and children that woke up and went to work and died for no reason. When we get to Guantanamo, I want you to remember what Islam did to us here. As we were flying down to Guantanamo, reality started setting in. I started thinking about the situation I had gotten myself into. I started thinking about, who is the worst of the worst? Who is Al-Qaeda? Who is the Taliban? I was fearful. I was worried. I was quite literally shaking in my boots. I was thinking in my head of Charleston Heston and Anthony Quinn. I thought every cell was going to have these men with big builds, and they were all going to be on horseback and have huge swords and giant beards. No matter what way they would turn, the wind would be blowing into their beard very charismatically. This is what I was expecting. What I got in Guantanamo was distinctly different. As we started our first tour of Camp Delta, which is where I would spend the next year working, the distance from about this wall to that wall was how close we were to Camp Delta when I began to smell Camp Delta. What I mean by smell Camp Delta, this is going to require a bit of imagination, so try to use your sensory tools. Camp Delta is essentially underneath the sun 24 hours a day. It's hard to imagine it. It's on the Tropic of Cancer. It's 98 degrees, 100% humidity. It's hot. Now you have 780 Muslim men from 46 different countries that, for lack of better words, are cooking in metal cages. Make no mistake about it. I don't know where the billions of dollars have gone to. Guantanamo is nothing more than aluminum siding and concrete blocks. We could go to Home Depot and buy everything we need to build Guantanamo. These men are cooking in these cages 24 hours a day. Most of the men only get to shower once every 3 weeks or 4 weeks. The reason behind this is that if a man should happen to do anything wrong, if he upsets a guard, if he upsets an interrogator, if he refuses to cooperate with a linguist or a doctor, if he does anything wrong, the very first privilege that we take away from a detainee is the right to shower. Because if a detainee doesn't have wudu, if a detainee can't make ghusl, he can't pray. If we can break his deen, he'll share information. He will tell the interrogators what he knows, so that way he can shower. The very first privilege we take away from detainees is the right to shower. Most of these men smell very bad. This is just physiology. It's just how humans are. I'm not trying to put them down. This is just how it is. You add on top of that, there's no running sewage in Camp Delta. There's PVC pipes underneath the cells that are at about a 75-degree angle. It's meant for the urine and feces to just drip down to a collection tank at the end of the block that's supposed to be cleaned out every 2 to 3 days. Now, what usually happens is somebody may pass a bowel movement, and that'll block the pipe. Nobody goes and cleans the pipes. The guards don't go and clean the pipes. So for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, this urine and feces is backing up underneath the cells, underneath where these men are sleeping, where these men are cooking. It's backing up underneath them, and it too is cooking in these pipes. And until a soldier does something really bad, nobody cleans out those pipes. That was the worst punishment you could get in Guantanamo, was having to clean out these pipes. Another smell that we had is the smell of the military working dogs. We had military working dogs walking all around the camp. Whenever we wanted to intimidate a detainee, we'd usually just let the dog off the leash. The dog would run up, jump on the detainee, maybe bite him, and scare him. Dogs don't care about going to the bathroom. They go to the bathroom when they please, where they please. Of course, the guard doesn't come up afterwards and clean up after the dog. He figures that somebody else did it. So intermittently, there's urine from dogs and feces from dogs. The last smell, which really had no reason for existence, but it was still there, was the smell of the guards. Now the guards, we could go home and shower at night. We had the ability to do that, obviously. But many of the guards had resorted to alcoholism to deal with what we were doing in Guantanamo. Whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Jew, whether you're a Buddhist, whether you're a Muslim, no religion believes that their creator created them with a predisposition to torture and abuse other men. Nobody believes that God made us to do this. So as you're torturing and abusing people, it starts wearing you down, it starts destroying your emotions, it starts eating at you, it starts making you depressed. You start questioning your reason for existence. You start wanting to die yourself. Many of the guards had become alcoholics. That was the only way they could cope with what we were doing in Guantanamo. So they would go home, they would drink a bottle, they'd pass out, wake up the next day and realize that they were late for work. They'd put on the same clothes from the day before and go running out the door. They'd be sitting there at 98 degrees, 100% humidity. They'd be sweating out all that alcohol from the night before. They would smell too. You can smell Camp Delta from a good 50 feet away. Once you walked into it, the smell was just unbearable. It took weeks to get used to that smell. The next thing that hits you is the sound of Guantanamo. As I had mentioned, 780 men from 46 different countries. You have 18 languages that are being spoken at any given time. You have Arabic, Urdu, Pashtun, Uyghur, Punjabi, Farsi, Indonesian, Malaysian, French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Swedish, but unfortunately nobody's speaking English. That was my problem. I only speak English. I don't speak English very well, but I only speak English. So I'm looking around wondering, how am I going to do my job? I don't speak any of these other languages. I got to find somebody who speaks English. And sure enough, as we're going on this tour, I hear something familiar. I hear something that kind of snaps me out of this haze. 7 cells down on the left-hand side, I hear a detainee rapping Eminem on top of his lungs. And I stop and I think to myself, wait a second, hold on. Now Fox said that the detainees hate America. And CNN said they hate America, and the Army told me that they hate America, they hate white people, and they hate freedom, and they hate Christianity. So for all intent and purpose, I mean, they definitely got to hate, Eminem. They really got to hate Eminem. He's got to be bad. Al-Qaeda must really hate Eminem. What's this guy doing rapping Eminem? And as we get up to his cell, I turn and I look at him and I go, hey you, detainee, what are you doing rapping? You're not allowed to rap, you're a Muslim. The Army told me about you. You Muslims, you hate everything. You hate freedom, you hate women, you hate all the good things about life. What are you doing rapping? And in broken English, he tries to tell me what happens to him when he goes to interrogation. The interrogator would usually chain him to the ground in a stress position. This position was meant to induce muscle atrophy, muscle failure. And he would be left in this position until he defecated himself. Usually this would take around 12 hours, sometimes 18 hours. He would be stuck in this position, literally, his muscles failing, his body collapsing on himself. While this is happening, there would be a strobe light in front of his face, the air conditioner would be set to 40, he'd be covered in a bucket of cold water. Oh, and Eminem would be on repeat for the entirety of the time at the loudest possible volume imaginable. If not Eminem, a Disney soundtrack. If not a Disney soundtrack, Celine Dion. If not Celine Dion, Drowning Pool, Skinny Puppy, Slayer, many of the other contemporary American rock bands. The idea was that they wanted to create such a sensory deprivation and sensory overload that he would go into shock and he would simply say whatever he could to get out of the situation. They wanted him to admit to doing all kinds of things. They wanted him to admit to being, the mastermind of this and making bombs and yada, yada, yada. His idea, his infinite wisdom, was that if he learned all of the words to these songs and started singing them, he got to interrogation. The interrogator would get upset. The interrogator would stop doing it. He went to interrogation a few weeks later. He started singing the song. He started singing Eminem. Sure enough, the interrogator became very upset. The interrogator punched him, kicked him a few times, told us to take him back to the block, said, we're not doing this today, no more. He's done, we're not doing this. Unfortunately for that detainee, Donald Rumsfeld and his gloriousness, the wonderful condition he left the U.S., he wrote the Guantanamo manual in a very interesting way, a very interesting terminology. You can all go home and download the Guantanamo SOP. Literally, that's all you have to type. Guantanamo SOP. And you can download the rule book that the soldiers and the interrogators were supposed to be using in Guantanamo. You can read the gray terminology. What I mean by gray terminology is that if we should happen to find out that a detainee has a particular phobia, we are allowed to exploit that phobia by any means to gain information for interrogation purposes. Can anybody in English tell me what I just said?
So if you have a fear, I can exploit that.
How? Exploit it how?
Well, if you have a fear of heights, I will expose you to heights.
We could, yes.
If you have a fear of darkness, I'll expose you to darkness. And
correct.
Yeah.
But to what limit?
What then you are about to die?
Precisely. There was no limit in what I just said. If a detainee is afraid of the dark, if a detainee is afraid of scorpions, insects, snakes, cockroaches, confined spaces, dogs, anything that we can happen to find out that the detainee is afraid of, we are allowed to use against the detainee to gain information for the purpose of interrogation. What that means is that if a detainee is afraid of confined spaces, we can put him in a coffin and leave him in a coffin and let him scream in terror for hours upon hours. If he's afraid of insects, snakes, scorpions, things like that, perhaps we may put those in the coffin with him, let them crawl over him, underneath his clothing and on his face, while he is screaming in terror. If he should happen to be afraid of dogs, it is okay for us to take the dog, let the dog off the leash, and leave him in the room with the dog alone. No one to protect him from the dog. Anything that we can do to exploit a phobia of a detainee is acceptable in Guantanamo if it is used for the purpose of gathering information. Now, as we were doing these things, I started thinking to myself, this is not America. This is not the people that I signed up to defend. This is not my country. This is not how we behave. America is supposed to be the home of the brave, the land of the free. We're supposed to be this great country. We're supposed to have all these rules and standards and accountability that we hold others to. We're supposed to be the pillar of light for the rest of the world. This is not how we behave. This is not what we do. This is not America. We get off of work, I start talking to my team leader, and I'm saying, I can't handle this. I can't handle what we're doing. I mean, this isn't right. This isn't how we're supposed to behave. It's just, this isn't complacent with me. I can't do this. And he tells me, when we get off of work, come over to my house. We'll talk about it. I'll have a few beers. You'll be all right. Standard solution in the Army. Have a few beers. You'll be all right. A couple more weeks go by. I'm starting to get tensed up again. I can't deal with this. I can't handle this. This isn't right. This feels wrong. Everything about this is wrong. I say to my platoon sergeant, Sergeant, I can't do this anymore. I can't handle this. I can't be dealing with this. This isn't right. This isn't who we are. This isn't America. He tells me, you need to remember 9/11. You need to remember what happened. You need to remember what Islam did to us. Islam started this war. We're finishing this war. You need to man up, soldier. A couple more weeks, I go to the top. I go to the first sergeant. It's my last appeal. It's the last process. First sergeant, I can't deal with this. I need to go to the doctor. I need to go see mental health. I'm thinking about suicide. I can't deal with what we're doing here. I can't deal with torturing and abusing these men. I just don't feel right about this. Oh, Brooks, how long have you been in the Army? You've been in for what, 5 months now? And you're still kind of new. It gets easier over time. What we're doing here gets easier over time. I can't let you go see the doctor, Holbrooks, because if I let you go, I gotta let him go, I gotta let him go. The next thing I know, half of my company is going to the doctor and talking about their feelings. I can't have this. I can't let you go to the doctor. You need to man up, have a beer, walk it off. I kept turning to my leadership, asking for help. I told my leadership plenty of times that what we were doing was wrong, that I didn't agree with it, that I couldn't do it anymore. And I was constantly told, have a beer, walk it off, man up. Islam started this war, we're going to finish it. Around this time, I started looking at the rest of my unit, and as I had said, most of us had become alcoholics. I'd say a fair number, probably 75% of us had become alcoholics. What I mean by this is that we would literally go home and drink a fifth of Jack Daniels daily. This is not a healthy habit to engage in by any means. That's an excessive amount of alcohol to be having daily. But this is what we had to do to sleep. This is what we had to do to not have nightmares. This is what we had to do to deal with our own misery and grief. While all of us are depressed, while all of us are miserable, while all of us are hating life, I'm going to work and I'm looking at the detainees and I'm wondering to myself, how can these men get up and pray? How can these men get up and think that there's a God in this world that cares about them? How can they possibly imagine anywhere in this universe, no matter how far the eye can see, that there's a God that possibly cares about their existence? You're in Guantanamo, you're going to die here. You're getting tortured and abused every day, and you think that God cares about you? I found a few detainees who spoke English well enough, and I asked them, how can you wake up and pray in a place like this? Why do you think God cares about you? The first detainee told me that it was just Allah testing his deen. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand that. They asked another detainee, how can you get up and pray in a place like this? He said it was just God testing his strength, that it was God testing his faith. I understood that. I understood those words. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't believe in God. I didn't have a religion. but I could understand the words that he was saying. He thought that God was testing his strength. I asked another detainee. He told me that people had come before him, generations had come before him, that had had it far worse, that this was just Allah testing him, and that he could deal with it, that he could take it. Each one of these detainees that I asked told me essentially that it was just God testing him. This blew my mind. I couldn't understand. Like, you think this is just a test? You can deal with this? That's how you rationalize it to yourself? You get tortured and abused every day, and you think it's just a test? I started asking, why do you guys pray so much? Did you prayed in the morning? Did you forget what you were praying for? So then you prayed again, and then you forgot it again, so you prayed again? And why don't you just write it down, and then you don't have to pray so much? Why are you praying that way? What's that way? What's that box thing that you guys are praying to? Do you think that box is God? Do you even believe in God? Do you believe in Allah? Okay, well, does Allah live in that box? Why do you pray towards that box? Why do you speak English when we talk, but you pray in that other language? That guy over there, he speaks Punjabi, but he prays in the same language as you. What's the deal with this? Why don't you pray in English? Why doesn't he pray in Punjabi? I don't get it. As I started asking the detainees these questions, they didn't get upset with me. They didn't become offended. They weren't mad that I was asking them questions about Islam. They would just answer the question and go about their day. All they wanted to do day after day was just wake up and live. Wake up and practice their deen. If they could get up and pray their 5 prayers, it was a good day. That's all that they cared about. They wouldn't go into dawah mode and tell me about how I should become a Muslim if only I knew. They wouldn't go and tell me that I was kafar, that I was going to burn in the hellfire, that I should be saved, that I should read the Quran, that I should say my Shahada. No. They would just answer the question and go about their business. They didn't want to make me a Muslim. They just wanted to live this. And seeing this, seeing the peace that they could derive from it, seeing the comfort that Islam was providing for them, that was kind of a light bulb moment. Literally, the light bulb above my head. Maybe the army lied to me about Islam. Maybe CNN and Fox lied to me about Islam. If these guys can be tortured and abused and they can still wake up and pray and believe that God loves them, maybe I should learn more about Islam. Maybe there's something more to it. Because all of us soldiers, we're going home every night, we're having our babysitters, watching porn, listening to the hate music and everything else that we do, and we're miserable. None of us are Muslims. But they got nothing. They're stuck in a cage for 24 hours a day. They're being abused, tortured, humiliated. And they're happy. I want that. One particular detainee who I've been asking as many questions with, Brother Ahmed Yarchidi, is from Morocco. Brother Yarchidi decided one day to give me his Quran. The significance behind this is that in Guantanamo, when you arrive, they ask you what language you speak. They give you a Quran in that language. If you lose your Quran, you do not get another one. If a dog chews on your Quran, urinates on it, whatever, you don't get another one. If an interrogator sets it on fire, you don't get another one. If the guards throw it in a toilet, you don't get another one. If in the midst of forcibly extracting you from your cell, we happen to cover you in pepper spray and cover your Quran in pepper spray, you do not get another one. I don't know if you guys know this, there's no Wi-Fi in Guantanamo, so you can't go to Darussalam.com and order yourself another Quran. You get one Quran. For him to give me the Quran essentially meant that he was going to die without a Quran in his possession. But it meant that much to him that I read. He said that it would answer the questions, that it would answer, it would help me what I was looking at. I didn't have an interest in becoming Muslim. I didn't have an interest in reading the Quran. I didn't want to take a religion. I just wanted to understand. But I went home and I read the Quran. And I think it was the 3rd night. At the end of the 3rd night I had been reading it. I started thinking to myself, this is the first time in my life I've ever read a religious book that has made sense. The Bible didn't make sense like this. The Torah doesn't make sense like this. The Bhagavad Gita doesn't make sense like this. These other religious scriptures, there's bits of truth in them, but they just didn't make sense. They didn't flow like this. But this book makes sense. This book, from beginning to end, it is easy to read. It is flawless. It is simple to understand. This book makes sense. And I decided that I wanted to take Islam for a test drive. I wanted to try out a bit of Islam and see if it made my life better, how it felt, how I could do, if I could do it even. The first thing that I did was I stopped drinking so much. Sure enough, when I started waking up, I started feeling better. You don't have a hangover, it's easy to go to work. It's easy to get through with the day. I get it. That's why those Muslims don't drink. You don't have a hangover, life is good. They got it. They got something going on there. I like that. I stopped smoking 2 packs of cigarettes every day. I started running better. I started running faster. I started feeling better. I get it. That's why those Muslims don't smoke. You don't smoke, you feel good. That's why some of those Muslims don't smoke. We'll work on that. We'll help. Stop eating the bad food and watching the movies and the music and all the things that I was doing to waste my time and to deal with what we were doing. And I started reflecting and reading more and thinking and growing. Each one of these steps that I was taking towards Islam, my life was becoming better. Each one of these steps that I was taking towards Islam, Islam was taking many steps towards me. Allah was taking many steps towards me. December came. We'd been in Guantanamo for 6 months, and I decided that I wanted to be a Muslim. I didn't know what I needed to do. I didn't know how to become a Muslim. I just knew that I wanted to be a Muslim. I'd been practicing and trying it out long enough, and I was ready. I wanted to find Brother Arachidi. I wanted him to help me. I wanted him to teach me how to become a Muslim. I went to work that day, and I went to the computer. I typed in his name, and he wasn't there. He wasn't in the king. There was only a couple of possibilities. Either we sent him home, which that obviously didn't happen. He died, which I hadn't heard of. Or we moved him to another camp for some reason, which would have been weird. As it turns out, something else that Donald Rumsfeld created for Guantanamo is called the Frequent Flyer Program. It's not like the Frequent Flyer Program I have here in the U.S. We weren't rewarding the detainees with frequent flyer miles or giving them 1.5% cash back on their purchases. The detainees were being moved every 1 to 2 hours. The idea is that if we would take a detainee from one cell to another cell, from one block to another block, from one camp to another camp, he was going to say hello to everybody on that block before he decided to go to sleep. And by the time he was done saying hello, we would move him again. And he'd go somewhere else, and by the time he was done saying hello, we'd move him again. We wanted to keep Brother Arachidi awake for a month. We wanted to wear his mind down to such a degree that he would tell us everything that he knew. The Department of Corrections, DOC, believed that Brother Arachidi was a general. They thought that he was a general of the Mujahideen. They thought that he was a well-respected fighter. And the reason they thought this was because every other detainee in Camp Delta respected him. Hands down, they treated him like the Sahaba. They respected him to no end. Brother Arachidi could walk onto a block and he could say silence and everybody would stop. Everybody would be quiet. They would stop dead in their tracks. On the flip side, he could walk onto a block and say riot, and every detainee would riot without questioning why. Knowing the privileges that would be taken away from them, knowing the abuse and torture that would happen to them, they would riot, and he said riot. The reason that he was so well respected is because he had already memorized the Quran. He knew the Quran. He knew Tajweed. He was fluent in 6 of the Tajweeds. I believe there's 10. He knew 6 out of the 10. Alhamdulillah. He had started memorizing many of the hadiths. He was a great, brilliant mind. For all intent and purpose, he was the best Muslim in the camp. He was respected because of his deen. He was respected because of his fiqh, his understanding. Not because he was a great fighter, not because he was a general. He was respected because he was a great Muslim. And the army couldn't figure this out, so they were torturing and abusing him on a special privilege, in a special way, because they wanted to know what he knew. I spent almost all of December looking for Brother Arachidi. December 29th came. He was on my block. I was working the night shift. I came walking up to him. I thanked him greatly. Thank you for giving me the Quran. Thank you, thank you. It answered all of my questions. And I started trying these things out. I started trying to live like a Muslim. And life feels good. And I'm feeling better. And I want to be a Muslim. And I want you to help me. What do I got to do? How do I become a Muslim? And he turns his head and he looks at me. He says, no. Not angry. Not mad. He just says no. And I went back to thinking of the recruiter. Why did this guy say no? I came in, I was ready to be a Muslim, I'm ready. He says no. I asked a couple of the detainees, they said it was okay to be white and be a Muslim. They said it was okay to be American and be a Muslim. I asked about my tattoos, they said it's okay if you have tattoos, you'll be forgiven. I asked the questions, I knew that I could become a Muslim, but he wasn't willing to. He said no. I couldn't sit and argue with him. I couldn't sit there and tell him, I can't accept no as an answer. And when you're a low rank like I was, when you're working in Guantanamo, you don't have time to just stop and do whatever you want. You have to do what I'm doing right now. For the entire 8 hours that you're working, you're walking up and down the block, back and forth. Because you have to make sure that nobody's passing notes. You have to make sure that nobody has any contraband. You have to make sure that nobody's trying to commit suicide. You have to stop everything bad from possibly happening. So you're walking up and down this block all day and night. Came back about an hour later. Most of the detainees had fallen asleep. I knew that I had a few minutes. I stopped and I said, you know, Ahmed, why would you give me a Quran if you're not going to let me become a Muslim? I mean, why would you talk to me about Islam if you're not going to let me be a Muslim? We've been answering my questions. We've been having these discussions for weeks now. Why can't I be a Muslim? What, am I not good enough or something? What's wrong? Why can't I be a Muslim? And he asks me, why do you want to be a Muslim? That's a very fair question. That's a very valid question. You know, if somebody walked into a Masjid right now and said they want to be a Muslim, I would run up to them and tell them to say the Shahada. I'd say, are you sure? Have you thought about this? Do you know what you are affirming and what you are denying? Do you know what you're giving up? Do you know how your life is going to change if you become a Muslim? Do you really know you're getting yourself into? I'd make sure they understood it. That's what Brother Arachidi wanted to do. He looked at me and he said, you understand, if you become a Muslim, your whole life is going to change. That flag on your shoulder, the way your country looks at you, that's going to change. It says U.S. Army on your chest. The way the Army looks at you, the way your soldiers look at you, your leadership, that's going to change. You've got a ring on your finger. The way your family looks at you, the way your wife looks at you, that's going to change. When you come to work, half the time I can smell what you drank the night before. That's going to have to stop. When you talk, you speak like a sailor. That's going to have to stop. You got nicotine stains on your fingers. This is going to have to stop. You get these tattoos all over your body, these holes. This is going to have to stop. Do you really know what it means to be a Muslim? Do you really understand? Well, I was a 19-year-old. I was a teenager. I knew everything. Any parents in the room? Anybody got a teenager at home? Do teenagers not know everything? Exactly, yes. I was a teenager. I knew everything. Yeah. I know what I'm getting myself into. I've been studying this out for 3 months now. I'm good. Let's do this. Come on. I got 3 months under my belt. I'm ready. I just don't know that all I have to do is say it. That's it. He asked me for a 3x5 card. And at 12:41 in the morning, he transliterates the Shahada for me in the dark while wearing handcuffs. He passes it back to me and he says, you need to say this and then you'll be a Muslim. I look at him like, what's it say? He says, you need to say that there is no God except for Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. That's it? I just got to say that and I'm a Muslim? Oh man, there is no God except for Allah and Allah is the messenger. No, brother. You have to say it in Arabic. Oh. A shadow, Anna? Who's Anna? None of you guys ever told me about Anna. I didn't read about Anna in the Quran. What's this Anna business? Oh, Anna. Okay. Shadu Anna. English wasn't his first language. He's from Morocco. He spoke Arabic, he spoke French. He had learned enough English to speak with me. Eventually, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan rasulullah. I knew that I had finally said it right when his face lit up, and the other detainees' face lit up, and they started saying all of these statements that ended in Allah, and they were really happy about it. Alhamdulillah, subhanallah, mashallah. I didn't know what they were saying. I'd been a Muslim for 4 seconds. But they were really happy. So I knew that I finally said it the right way. I went home that night, and I started thinking to myself that it finally felt like life had a purpose. I finally felt like I was going towards somewhere, like I had direction. What I had wanted from the army, what I had wanted from my marriage, what I had wanted from my family that I hadn't got, I finally felt like I had it once I had said my Shahada. I had the next 2 days off of work, and I did a bunch of reading, and I started, man, I gotta pray. I gotta pray every day. Oh man, I don't know how to pray. I gotta learn how to pray. How am I gonna do this? I gotta go to work. I gotta find a detainee who speaks English. I gotta learn how to pray. I only knew maybe a dozen detainees at that point in time who spoke English well. So I went back to work 2 days later, and I'm hoping that I can find a detainee that speaks English. Out of 780, I only know a dozen that speak English. I walk down to the block, I got my fingers crossed. Just give me an English speaker. Give me one English speaker. I start looking up and down, start looking who's around. And almost in unison, all the detainees, SubhanAllah, you're a Muslim now, you're one of us, welcome to the deen. And my jaw drops as I realize that every detainee in Guantanamo knows English. Everyone of them knows English. They know English fluently. They know English backwards, forwards, inside, outside. They know English better than we know English. They just don't want to talk to the guards. I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to talk to the guards either. So I get it. I was upset with a few of the detainees who had been pretending not to know English. There was this one who I'd asked once, do you want more soap? Soap? No, soap. Soap? Soap! Do you want more soap? I didn't know there was a P in Arabic. You want more soap? I was like, soap? No, I'm not trying to offer you a car. Do you want soap? This conversation went back and forth for a good 5 minutes. When I found out that he knew English, you better believe I was mad. I was really upset. At any rate, I could spend the next 10 minutes talking about how the army reacted. I could spend the next 10 minutes talking about how my wife and my family and everybody else reacted, but I'd rather talk about something a bit more important as far as I'm concerned. When I was in Guantanamo 10 years ago, we were at the maximum population that Guantanamo has had for this conflict. For this conflict. Implication there, meaning we've had detainees in Guantanamo for probably the last 7 years. This is just the first time it's in the news. When I was in Guantanamo, there were 780 detainees. Since then, we have sent 80% of the detainees back to their home country. I'll do the math for you. It's approximately 664 detainees have gone home. Out of the 140 some odd that are still remaining, I think more than half of them have been cleared to go home. It's about 80 that have been cleared to go home. We just didn't think to ourselves, what are we going to do with men from Somalia, men from Yemen, men from Mali, after we've been torturing them for 12 years? Where do we send them? Do we send Somalis that we've been torturing for 12 years back to Somalia and hope that they don't become part of Al-Shabaab? What do we do with these men? We didn't think about this. But we're going to send them somewhere. Inshallah, we're going to send them somewhere. We only have 65 guilty men in Guantanamo. And in 12 years that these 65 men have been there, we have yet to been able to figure out how to falsify charges, how to try them, how to convict them. There is nobody in Guantanamo who has been charged, tried, and convicted. That is due process. Charged, tried, convicted. None of them have that. While we have been sending all of these men home, while we have been making Guantanamo a smaller population, making it look as if we're about to close it, we have also added an additional 4 facilities. We have invested billions of dollars into Guantanamo. The most recent contract was awarded to an English company that's owned by Tony Blair, $415 million to renovate Guantanamo further. Guantanamo can now be ran by 30 American citizens. That's all it takes. 30 soldiers can run Guantanamo. The detainees who are living in Guantanamo at this point are living in isolation. They do not see other detainees. They do not see guards. The guard sits in a tower, presses a button, his door opens. He presses another button, the shower turns on. He presses another button, the shower turns on. That is the life of the detainee. With all the money that we are putting into Guantanamo, with all of those expansions that we've been putting into Guantanamo, does it sound as if we're about to close it? As Brother Abdullah had mentioned, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2011, this was an executive order that President Barack Obama signed. An executive order meaning that House, the Senate, Congress didn't agree about this. He signed this into action. He said, as the President of the United States, in battle with the global war on terror, I need the right to persecute anybody that I should happen to deem to be a terrorist or capable of becoming a terrorist. I need the right to send these people to wherever I should choose to send them. What does this have to do with us? That includes Americans. Everybody in this room is eligible to go to Guantanamo. Under the National Defense Authorization Act, the President, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and many other government organizations have the right to send you to Guantanamo. My fear is that we are not going to do something. We're not going to care about it until people start disappearing. We are not going to close Guantanamo. We've had that soil since 1903. We signed a contract with Cuba in 1913. $2,000 a year is how much we spend in a perpetual lease to have Guantanamo. It's not under the Geneva Convention. We can torture and abuse men freely there. There's no consequence. Make no mistake about it, it's not going anywhere. We're not fundraising. You guys have pledges. You have the information in front of you. I implore you to please do something about this. As he had alluded to, fiqh priority, something that I like to talk about when I'm speaking. We love to give money to Palestine. We should. Palestine needs our money. We love to give money to Syria. We love to give money to Pakistan. We love to take care of the people who are in need. We need to. It's part of our responsibility as Muslims. We are one ummah, one body. However, if we don't defend our right and our privilege to give money to Palestine, to give money to Syria, if we don't defend that right, we're not going to be able to any longer. If we do not defend our legal freedoms in this country, we will not have legal freedoms in this country. What the Muslims are going through right now is the same thing that the African Americans, the Jews, the gay and lesbians, the Irish, everybody who is not a white Protestant in this country has had to go through. And the way that they all overcame the persecution was by getting involved in the legal system and the education system. We need to take action, and that's how we need to do it. If your neighbors don't know that you are a Muslim, as far as I'm concerned, you are failing at your deen. If your co-workers don't know, if your fellow students don't know, you are failing. I was not led to Islam by some great rational argument. I was not led to Islam because I read the Quran and it was the most prolific book I ever read. I was led to Islam because I was watching men who were being tortured and abused, and all they wanted to do was live Islam. That was enough for them. To be compassionate, to be merciful, to be sympathetic, and to treat each other with dignity and respect. That's how we need to behave. We are here to be a witness to the rest of the world. We need to act like it. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.